Hello and welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, tales of mishaps, misfortune, and misadventure. Today I have a special guest, the multi-talented Captain Tom Kastle. Tom, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich. It's great to be here.
Now, when I say you're multi-talented, I'm not kidding. Looking through your looking through your credentials and all of the work you've done it makes me wonder what you can't do. But I'll let you explain. So tell us all about what you do, all the work that you're involved with.
Well, let's see. Since you talk about diving a lot, I would say that I grew up really wanting to be Jacques Cousteau, or at least, someplace on the ship with him. And then I hit the math wall somewhere around middle school and beat a hasty retreat into the arts. And then somewhere around, let me see, maybe around 20, 23 years old, started sailing on an old traditional Chesapeake Bay oyster boat called Charlotte Ann. She's an 85-foot schooner that started out in Chesapeake and was built at the Rice Brothers Yard in New Jersey in 1888. And that's where the hook was definitely set for sailing on traditional ships. At the same time, my ex-partner and I were playing in Irish pubs all around Chicago, and those two things came together, and we basically designed a career that was sailing on traditional ships and then singing and telling stories about it in the off season. And it's worked out really, really great over these years. I got my captain's license in the 90s. And it's been fantastic, except that particular career path has a pretty crummy retirement plan. But otherwise, it's just fine. So I've been able to do all these different things, and circling around, I've captained some of the boats that do environmental education and sail training and stuff. And I was on the schooner Inland Seas up around Beaver Island a few years back, and we were working with graduate oceanography students from MSU. And I realized that, I actually did it. I got to be maybe not an oceanographer, but at least the one that drives them around.
Well, that's still good work if you can get it. And incidentally, podcaster also has very poor retirement benefits, just so you know.
Oh, no, I hear you. I'm doing I'm doing a podcast on the Charlotte Ann because there's an exhibit at the Chicago Maritime Museum about the Charlotte Ann. And a couple of the people who were the main owners and operators back in the day have passed away. And it was something where I had already been doing a series of podcasts for the schooner Dennis Sullivan in Milwaukee. And I was talking to the people at the museum, and I said, we've got to get these stories down, before we lose anybody else. So we're getting together and doing a whole series of podcasts just from the stories of Charlotte Ann as well.
So the Charlotte Ann is located in Chicago?
Well, she was in
She was.
in the mid 90s. She broke up in a yard. Again, she was built in 1888, and wear and tear. And during the late 70s and early 80s, it was the thing to coat the bottoms of wooden boats with fiberglass, and which was a great thing to do for a few years, but speed forward a decade or two, and you've got all kinds of problems. So the keel was hogged, planks were springing. It was just not a pretty thing, and she never sailed again after that.
And the your time as a mariner, starting from when you first were involved up until now, what sort of experiences have you had, either solo or with a crew, or what adventures have you had as a mariner?
Well, I've sailed mostly schooners. That's been my passion for sure. So I got to the level of unlicensed mate on Charlotte Ann. And then I started crewing and relief captaining for most of the tall ships on Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes. So when Bob Marte brought the schooner Windy to Chicago in '96, I was mate, and then he trained me to run the boat. So I was relief captain of Windy, Windy 2, the Red Witch, a beautiful little Alden schooner, Friends Goodwill out of the Michigan Maritime Museum in South Haven, though she's a square topsail sloop, a replica of the War of 1812 ship. Let's see, schooner Inland Seas, and then most recently I was the relief captain of the Dennis Sullivan in Milwaukee until, unfortunately, Discovery World sold her to another organization out in Boston.
You mentioned your time spent as a musician versus captaining ships on the Great Lakes. How did the musician in you become intertwined with the mariner side? Was that a natural fit, or how did that evolve?
Well, right. The reason we found the Charlotte Ann was because we had just recorded this song called "Song for the Whales," which has nothing to do with the Great Lakes at all. It's a story from a fellow who was doing the pipeline up in Alaska in the late 70s, and he spotted this fellow in some port in Alaska in a small boat, and he had the usual stuff with him, some foul weather gear and some oars and a big outboard, and but he also had a guitar with him. So this friend of a friend asked him, "Why do you have a guitar in this boat?" And he said, "I like to go out and sing to the whales because they really, really like music." And I heard that story, not surprisingly, in a bar, and during a folk open stage night. And so we wrote this song, and one thing led to another, and we decided to have a Great Lakes whale watch. And we literally, back then in the 80s, they had these things called phone books. And I opened up the phone book, and there was a pen and ink sketch of this 19th century schooner. And so we just called them up, and we did the first whale watch on that schooner, Charlotte Ann. And then we got to be volunteers, and then we got to be paid crew, and then I ended up being the mate, and then studying for my license, around that time. And so the two of them just kind of, dovetailed into each other. And the music never stopped. And since we were always interested in the story and the background and the history, we joined the Chicago Maritime Society. And there was a history professor at Loyola University named Ted Karamansky, who's also still active in the museum. And he said, "Have you ever heard of the Ivan Henry Walton collection at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor?" And we said no. So we went to the Bentley Historical Library there and found out that there was this professor who dragged a record-cutting machine around the Great Lakes from around 1939 to 1942. And he was recording these old sailors, sometimes in nursing homes, sometimes just in their homes, telling stories and singing songs of when they were young men sailing in the 1880s in the Great Lakes. And that really got us started into Great Lakes maritime songs, stories, history, and that still continues to today. And being a Great Lakes sailor, and then taking that tradition and taking it all around the world. So we've played at maritime museums and tall ship festivals, and let's see. Actually, I'm going to the Netherlands in October to do a sea music festival, where I'll be doing a lot of this music in Friesland, a little town called Vorkum, and they have a shipyard there that's 400 years old. It's still operating. Wow. It's talk about traditions. And New Zealand and Poland and Ireland and Scotland and, all over the place, all around the States and Canada. So it's become this, primary focus of what I did for years and years. And then about a decade ago, I started doing theater, and then that's taking a whole other thing too. Oh, also with the Chicago Maritime Society, I met the Underwater Archaeological Society of Chicago, and I got to do some dives with them. I'm a very beginner level, like open water, guy, but I did get to do a couple of shipwreck dives, 5 and 10 miles offshore in off Chicago with them, and that's still some of the best times in the water I've ever had.
Wow. Like I said, you do a little bit of everything. So it doesn't surprise me that you also are a diver. I wanted to ask you about sea shanties. They had a resurgence a few years back during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was kind of fun. I enjoyed that. But there is a history to sea shanties and, some significance behind them. Uh, Care to explain that? What they were for and how they were used on a ship?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of different books on the subject. Joanna Colcard, Dorflinger. My personal favorite is a fellow named Stan Hugel, who passed away in the 90s. But I did get a chance to sing with him a couple of times, and he was what they called the last shantyman. The really, going around the horn in a square rigger full of guano, on a commercial ship, not a tourist thing, not a
Yeah.
replica ship, and that's been shanties are basically just work songs, and they're tools. And but these days, because of the success of the viral popularity, shanty seems to refer to any song about the sea now. But technically speaking, they are work songs. They're usually done a cappella because nobody's going to pay you to play guitar on a merchant ship in the 1800s, and basically everyone had their hands full, literally. So there are halyard shanties for raising sail. There are capstan shanties for walking around a capstan and raising anchor, or many of the things you use a capstan for. Windlass shanties, bump shanties, and doing a lot of music on board ships, especially with students. So I got a chance to sail on the Clearwater with Pete Seeger back in the 90s,
Oh,
and they used songs for education and for working too. They have a mainsail that is just enormous. It's like 12 people to raise it. I think it's over 2,000 pounds with the spars, and so when I got to inland seas and Traverse City, that's a enormously successful program that does environmental education and sail training. Tom Kelly, the founder of that, was a mate of the month on the Clearwater and a marine biologist. So, making a long story slightly shorter, started using shanties on inland seas and other boats, especially if you have 30 students and you want them to do something on board the ship. So that could be going hand over hand, bringing in a trawling net, going hand over hand with a halyard to raise a sail, doing some really short pulls to get the anchor in, different things. And we would do different songs, and you could either go with a group of, say you've got a bunch of sixth graders lined up and you want them to pull on a line all at the same time. You can either go 1, 2, 3, pull, or you can just teach them a song. And if you teach them a song, it builds community, camaraderie really, really fast. And so we use different ones. John Come Tell Us As We Haul Away, or Haul Away Joe, but John Kanako was the one that worked the best. And it's just basically you use one of the words in the chorus to signal that's when you pull. So it'd be like, John Kanaka or John Kanaka. And that song, for some reason, is the golden shanty for, I swear, to teach. A fourth grader will do it. A recalcitrant eighth grade boy who doesn't think anything is cool will use it. I've actually sung it with memory care people in nursing homes.
yeah.
And they, for some reason, they love that. There's an intro, get them to sing it, and they will sing that. It's it's like the miracle shanty for me. And then there are all kinds of shanties that are, have historical significance. pirates or the War of 1812 or the Merchant Marine or the Black Ball Line or, some of the legendary mercantile, shipping. So it's all over the place. And in the Walton collection on the Great Lakes, there are interviews with sailors who were sailing back in the 1880s, and you'll read one report and it says, oh, yes, we used these. We had a bunch of saltwater sailors on our ship, so we did these 5 songs or these 10 songs. And then the next interview will say, no, we never sang a shanty ever on a Great Lakes ship. So all of this stuff is a grain of salt, and no matter what story you're hearing. But it's one of those things that's, I've definitely taken on personally, definitely used it on board ship as a tool and not just, something that's an art form. And also shanties I'm glad they're enjoying a comeback, and they also bring up topics like, like labor or like, I read somebody posting a thing about shanties and colonialism. I was like, oh yeah. Who was using these? When were they using them? And there's a whole bunch it's a great rabbit hole to go down because, you can listen to the Wellerman one time and then start Googling shanties, and all of a sudden you're back with Stan Hugel doing a shanty aboard the Morgan at Mystic Seaport, and now you've just read 6 books on it, and yeah, you're hooked for life.
I was just at Mystic Seaport a few weeks ago, and I went on the Morgan.
Yeah,
beautiful whale ship. Yeah.
And that was
fantastic.
One of the coolest thing. I'm very sad that Mystic decided, I think 4 or 5 years ago, to stop having the Sea Music Festival. But they did it for, I think, close to 40 years. It's now the Connecticut the Connecticut Sea Music Festival. It's in Essex, just down the road. But to go on board the Morgan, back in the day with Stan Hugel hoisting the topsail with a shanty that he learned 70 years ago. I mean, that's it's golden. Absolutely.
And when I think of shanties, I think of, that cadence. There's that repeating pattern that lends itself well to doing repetitive work. And I always feel like the sailors it help pass the time for them. They're doing this monotonous work. Not only does it help keep them all in rhythm, it just kind of gives them maybe a break from the tedious and quite strenuous work that they're doing to be able to, have music as an outlet.
Oh, yeah. There's a tradition, too. Different authors have remarked on the fact that shanties were one of the chances you had to just, talk about all the horrible stuff that you were experiencing. You couldn't say the mate was a whatever, but you could sing about the fact that the mate was whatever. And according to some books, they would say that they give you a free pass on that. It was a way to let off a little bit of steam that was allowed. You couldn't say it to somebody's face, but you could say it in a song, and that's right. I like that part of it a whole lot. It's pretty neat, and also just the way it sucks you down into the whole history of ships. And one thing I was just at the Connecticut Sea Music Festival, and one of the singers, I think it was Bob Walzer, was talking about the fact that, we think about shanties as, English and Scottish, but actually it started, he had a really good argument saying it actually started in America and the Caribbean with dock workers, with, African-American field songs that came out of Africa. And if you were in the Caribbean and you were at, I don't know, Bermuda or Jamaica or whatever, and you would hear these guys singing these songs in the fields or on boats, you take those home with you. And there's a lot of shanties that started out. It's kind of like a global game of telephone. So somebody hears this guy in the cotton docks of Mobile, Alabama, and they're doing this song, and they say, "Well, I'll use that on my ship," and then they get on a German ship, and then it varies again, and then there are stories about being on different really huge merchant vessels where somebody will sing a verse in Dutch and another one in German, and then the chorus will be in English because the English and the Americans have the biggest fleets. So it's all of this, there's a song called Shenandoah, and they talk about, across the wide Missouri. And when that got back to the islands, I want to say it was Bermuda, but I could be wrong. It morphed into a chorus that was "In this land of misery," because nobody knew what a Missouri was. So we're like, I don't know, it sounds like misery. So there are versions of these different songs that take on these, different things. And again, global game of telephone. Maritime music was the first world music, period, because that's the only way you could get from one place to another. And so it's really, really fascinating. And I took an interest in South Pacific voyaging and studied some South Pacific music with Lani Aloha Lee at the Old Town School of Folk Music, where I was doing a sea music class and doing a beginner concertina class, and just ran across her, and we started talking about, voyaging and, some of the chants that the South Pacific Islanders had when they were making voyages of thousands of miles while, Europeans were bumping into the Rock of Gibraltar and thinking it was the end of the world. So, you start out with the Wellerman, and all of a sudden you're on the Hokulea going to Tahiti. It's fascinating stuff. I think the hardest thing is trying to focus on one thing, especially for me. But
so we talk about shanties, but there's certainly plenty of other styles of maritime music, ballads and odes and things like that. Have you written any originals? I'm guessing you probably have, but
yeah. There's I have a greatest hit. It's called Cold Winds. Actually, I wrote it back in the '80s, sailing on Charlotte Ann, and it's been recorded by at least one Dutch group, a couple English groups. The Longest Johns have a video of it on YouTube that has got like 1 million views, and still waiting to get asked on the tour. Would be nice, but that's a tune. I just started playing concertina. I was fooling around with this minor chord thing, and the song just wrote itself. I was heading out of town and to actually do a short tour with my old partner, and we stopped at Charlotte Ann to double up the lines because this storm was coming in. We didn't know if anybody else was down there. So we stopped at Burnham Harbor, and we doubled up the lines on the ship, got back in the van and started driving. And the thing that really drove it to me is that when you're working on boats in cold weather, especially when your hands are so cold and you hit something and you didn't realize you did because your hands are that cold. And that was the feeling I wanted to get. And so I worked on the song for a while. And then one day I was back in Chicago. For some reason, I was driving around O'Hare Airport, and it just hit me. And I basically pulled into a utility driveway and wrote the entire song down. And I think I only changed 2 words in the last couple of decades. And it's, when the fire strikes, you gotta go for it. And so that one definitely, I've done, the two of us wrote a ballad about the Eastland, the largest loss of life anywhere on the Great Lakes. Back in 1915, the Great Storm of 1913, I think it is, and what is it? Dancing Jimmy Owen is another ballad, and then there's just been regular kind of love songs and whatnot. If you go to the Wisconsin Maritime Museum, years and years ago, I went there, and I was talking to the curator, and he said, "I know you're just here looking for songs and poems. And let me tell you, I've been through all this stuff and there aren't any. And they have this collection. I think it's the Tim Kelly Diaries. And Tim Kelly was a guy who went from sail to steam, turn of the last century. And his logbooks are, I want to say like 20 years of logbooks are all there. And I remember opening up the first one, I think it was 1871. And in the back of that first logbook was snippets of ballads and poetry and all kinds of stuff. And, gee, I miss my wife and I hope I live through this. And, the typical sailor subjects. And it's all over the place. It's in, different books. Dana's 2 years before the mast, they talk about singing Sacramento and other songs. It is definitely woven into the whole fabric of sailing all over the world, definitely not just here. But I was doing the largest sea music festival is in Krakow, Poland, nowhere near the ocean. And when I did that a couple times in the 90s, it was all sevens. There were 70 people on the main stage at the end of the night for the finale, from 17 countries, and we were singing in 7 different languages.
Wow.
And it was all sea shanties and ballads, but mostly shanties. And so every generation too takes that. My sweetheart Mariah is a tall ship sailor. That's how we met. And she will tell you that she's crewed the Alyssa down in Galveston since she was a little kid, and also the brig Niagara out of Erie. And she told me, we were talking about songs, and she's a wonderful shanty singer too, though she will never admit it. And she said they're up at the topsail of the brig Niagara, furling the sail, and instead of doing a traditional one, they would go do-a-dee-dee-dee-dee-dum-dee-dee-do, and then furl the sail up on the yard on that last syllable.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think about, oh, shoot, that's what sailors, they would just take whatever the pop song was in those days. So it could be a Stephen Foster song in America, or it could be a Charles Didbin song in England, and they would just sing whatever the pop song was of the day. So not a lot has changed. And now, because of the Wellerman and all this internet viral, activity, there's a whole new generation of tall ship sailors and singers who are rediscovering all this stuff and then adding to that tradition too. It's really cool.
Speaking of inspiration, what do you think has been your inspiration as a musician?
Ooh, that's all over the place. I started out in, 7th grade doing garage bands, and then kind of singer-songwriter stuff, folky stuff. Spent about 7 years going around to Irish pubs and Irish festivals, and it all leaves a different, flavor. And then in the last decade too, I've been doing. When I moved to Madison, I had a phenomenal midlife crisis, just great. And when I moved here, I decided I wanted to take voice lessons, and start taking some theory and just hitting the reset button and doing stuff I never did before. So I ended up taking voice lessons from a Romanian opera singer by the name of Codruț Pirsan, who is now in Chicago. He does a thing called Chicago Summer Opera. And he had me narrating concert operas for his company. Though I wasn't singing in them, I started, learning about opera, and we did 8 concert operas in 8 years. And then I thought to myself, there's a couple of non-singing roles in opera that would be fun to do. So I ended up doing one for the Madison Savoyards. I was the drunken German jailer Frosch in Die Fledermaus. And actually, if you go to my website, there's a thing about my classical story that is tells the story much better. But I started doing that, and then some of the people there were like, "Oh, you should do some more acting. You should, take a scene class or something." And then one thing led to another, and I ended up, doing that. I was just Samuel in Pirates of Penzance a couple summers ago. I've done Shakespeare. I have a good friend, Francisco Torres, who's my director for a couple projects we're working on, and he's the guy everybody needs a friend who really kicks their butt to do stuff they're not all that anxious to do. So he would do things for the last, 8 years, be like, "Oh, you should audition for the Madison Shakespeare Company." I'm like, "I can't do freaking Shakespeare. Are you kidding?" So now I've done 4 of them, and I've created a score for As You Like It, and I've been Henry IV twice now, and doing all these things you never thought you could do, and it all goes back into the previous experience. So I've been thinking for years about doing something about the Great Lakes pirate Dan Seavey, and because whenever you're on a boat, in Chicago or any place on the Great Lakes, I also did tour boats on the Chicago River, some really nice vintage 1950s 65-foot tour boats with Detroit diesels, and I'm just so much fun. And not all sailors are into twin screw boats, but I loved it. I had a great time doing that with Mercury in Chicago, and one thing led to another, and I was thinking, people always, those passengers, those tourists would say, "Were there pirates on the Great Lakes?" And right now, if you Google pirates in Great Lakes, one name will come up. It's Dan Seavey. He was, 1880s to like 1943, I think. And I always wanted to do something. I wanted to write a ballad about him. I wanted to do a story, and I just never could do it. And then I had a small theater company here in Madison, Fermat's Last Theater Company, asked me to do a one-man play on Joe Hill, the labor organizer from 110 years ago. And so I ended up doing a one-man show, and then I thought to myself, well, shoot, if I can do a one-man play about Joe Hill, maybe I can do one about Dan Seavey. So we've just done 3 preview performances. Francisco's directing it. I'm talking to 3 different theater companies about maybe doing a performance of it here and there. And so we're going to be doing our debut sometime early next year. In a regular theater. And Seavey is a really interesting character. He's very much like the movie version of Long John Silver, where you meet him, he's this colorful character, you think he's really cool. In the middle, you find out he's not very cool. He's a really horrible criminal, murderous SOB. And then in the end, you still are kind of cheering for him, So I took that as a model and I wrote it. And I've spent over 2 years working on it. And it's finally to the point where we have 99% of it done. And though I think I'm going to incorporate a little concertina into it too. So we'll see how that goes.
That seems natural for a pirate story.
You got to.
You mentioned your website. It's tomkastle.com with a K, Kastle, if anybody wants to check in there and look at your work and see about performance dates for these plays starring Tom Kastle.
Woohoo!
Now, the story of Dan Seavey and some of these other ones that you've sung about, what do you think your favorite maritime story is?
There are just so many because of the people that you meet doing this. I'm sure you have the you're a story lover too. I mean, so you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's just the person you're talking to. Sometimes it's their story. There was this little fellow. I don't have a specific story, but I would say he's about 5'2", bald, and the only part of him that wasn't tattooed were the tops of his fingers. I met him at a sailboat show in Chicago, probably back in the early 90s. And he just referred to himself as Blueback. And he carried around his passport from 1939 that was completely filled. And then there's another page stapled on. It was completely filled. And another one and another one. I want to say there's 3 or 4. And he had sailed all over the world, merchant, fleets, his whole life. And he was not an educated guy, but he could sit there and talk to you about the physics of sailing, esoteric Buddhism, what life was like in this country or that country, in Asia or Africa or anywhere around the world, because he did 2 things: he sailed and he read. And some of my favorite people are those people who just have this curiosity about everything they're around, and they collect these stories. And once you start talking to people like that, you start encountering more of them, So Blueback had some great stories. Every sailor I've ever met. My sweetheart grew up on the Alyssa down in Galveston, which is an iron bark from 1877, and she was down in the forecastle with a needle gun busting rust when she was like 6. So, yeah, and she's a blacksmith today, besides being an ER nurse. So we want to talk about some stories, definitely.
That's an interesting combination. Yeah.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And so there's that. I think one of the things about if you're on ships in the Great Lakes, eventually you're going to end up on a War of 1812 replica of some kind. Niagara or Friends Goodwill, and Walter Ripka, the phenomenal captain of actually both Alyssa and Niagara. He's written extensively on that, and Commander Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry, don't give up the ship. I think Walter wrote something about to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, but it's kind of like, the fellow that was known for don't give up the ship. He was in a rowboat abandoning ship at that point, holding a flag that said, don't give up the ship. And if it wasn't for 2 changes in the wind, he would be remembered forever as a arrogant, inexperienced ship officer. And also, if it wasn't for those 2 shifts in the wind during the Battle of Lake Erie in 1813, we would all be in Canada right now. And it's the first time, I think the only time, a British squadron, naval squadron, has been completely defeated was Perry in the Battle of Lake Erie. It's in fact, I joined a whole bunch of people in Put-in Bay, Ohio in 2013. There's a little documentary about it too, and that a station in Ohio did, and they recreated the entire battle with, I want to say it was 13 tall ships, 72 security vessels, and 2,000 recreational boats.
Wow.
So picture a Civil War reenactment, but you can only get there by boat. So it was one of the most phenomenal things I've ever seen. And it was, and it was all these people out. And when they, Wes Hearson, I believe, was the captain who plotted the whole thing out. And he realized, because they were trying to figure out how to do this safely and how the wind was blowing, blah, blah, blah. And when they finally decided at the exact spot in the bay where they were going to do it, it was literally right on top of where the original battle took place.
Yeah.
So it was really, really, really interesting. And then there's all the pirate stories and the Dan Seavey stories and the shipwreck stories, and it's hard to have one more than anything else. There are a lot of people whose lives have definitely been changed working on tall ships. There's people that sign on to do, to crew on a boat during the summer in Chicago, and it's going to be a lot of fun before they go back to school, and then they spend the next 25, 30 years sailing on every kind of ship all around the world. The community of it. When I was in New Zealand, the way it's all connected to me, there is a little lake they call the Great Lake. Not the Great Lakes, but just one in Lake Taupo. And I was getting on board a charter boat. It was a 42-foot, I think it was a yawl that used to belong to Errol Flynn, called Barbary. And there was this Aussie captain who was captaining the boat and running the charter. And I got on board, and I had an Inland Seas fleece vest on. And he said, "Oh, where's that boat?" I said, "Oh, it's in America." He said, "Oh, where?" I said, "Oh, in the Great Lakes." "Oh, do you know a boat called the Manitou?" I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "Do you know a girl named Stacy on the Manitou?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Oh, she was just on this boat 3 months ago." and she's on a square rigger off the coast right now. And that's the world. Being in the tall ship world is like your backstage pass to any ship ever. It is just this worldwide community, and folk music is very much like that. And if you put the two worlds together, the folk music and tall ships, man, it's amazing. Except for the retirement plan again. Yeah.
What has been the most memorable moment for you in any capacity?
The friends that you make. My first captain now runs a boat company down Fort Lauderdale, and we can get to, if we got together an hour from now, we would pick up exactly where we left off 5 years ago in his kitchen, sitting around. And there's so many people like that. The characters. We had what we called the Golden Summer in South Haven, Michigan, when I was captaining Friends Goodwill there in '07. I don't think I would ever come close to that again. First of all, the captain and the crew all lived in the lighthouse keeper's house, which nobody can do anymore. And it wasn't our fault. No. There's just they use it as an archive now. We sailed on this boat that was only 3 years old, a replica of the War of 1812 Friends Goodwill. She was rigged in the old-fashioned ways. There were no West Marine or hardware store shackles. It was all ropes and grommets and seizing and tar and the old ways of doing things. That's where I met my sweetheart, which doesn't hurt either. And we had a museum director who said, I don't really know anything about ships, but I'm learning. And she said, just take the whole month of May and just go play with the boat. So we had a 100-foot square topsail sloop, and we had things. I'd never had a square rig sail that I used before, so that was a learning curve. They had a thing on the mainsail called a tricing pennant, which I had never even heard of. And we would go out, and I had a crew of, I think it was 6 altogether, and then we had 30 volunteers, and we would all go out and we would play every day. And somebody would say, "Oh, well," I said, "how long does it take you guys to reef the mainsail?" I said, "Oh, I don't know." I said, "Well, get the watch out. Let's try it." And we did, I don't know, 25, 30 man overboard drills. We did fire drills. We said, what happens if we strike all what happens if we put the sails up backwards one day instead of instead of starting with the main and working your way forward, let's start forward and work our way back and see what happens. Or as the captain, I would tap the senior deckhand on the shoulder and said, "I just fell overboard. Figure it out." And the whole summer was like that. And we had different people that have passed on since then. Our favorite was a volunteer named Ed Pratt, and Ed ran away to sea when he was 16. He joined the Merchant Marine in World War II, and he spent almost 3 years Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean. He came home, married his childhood sweetheart. He became an actor. He was a guitar player in dance bands in the 40s and early 50s. He was a car salesman and a milkman, and he started coming out of retirement a little in 2004 when they built the ship. And in 2007, he became our favorite volunteer. And he had his 80th birthday crossing Lake Michigan, 127 miles from South Haven to Kenosha. And Ed's stories and his songs were just the best. And just learning from somebody like that was just fantastic. And there was that one summer, bringing the boat into Kenosha, we had a little saluting black powder gun, and then we had a huge, like 6-pounder that shot a charge about that big. And so we came in. We had so many crew, we could do anything we wanted. We came in down the channel. We dropped all our sail at exactly the same time, motored in, did a salute to the lighthouse, a gun salute to the yacht club gun, came into the dock. Our lightest, most agile deckhand took a line and swung from the yard, dropped down on the dock, had a perfect docking. And for some reason, I have no idea why, they had a Tom and Chris Kastle song on as we were doing this on their PA system.
Wow.
I was like, I don't care, I love sailing, but if I never do another season professionally, that's fine. That was the golden summer. And then I've done Dennis Sullivan and a couple other boats, and so the adventure never ends.
Well, earlier we mentioned how busy you were over the summer doing your tour. But what's up next for you? What's on your production schedule?
Oh boy, let's see. Well, working on the 2 one-man plays, that's the biggest thing. And it's so weird because you think you'd have more to report, but everything's in the works, As Francisco, our director, would say, it's in development. So it's in development. I'm definitely taking the Joe Hill play to New York in March. A little place called the People's Voice Cafe in Greenwich Village that's been there since the 60s, I believe. That's coming up. The other thing has nothing to do with boats is political music. And I started doing that in Madison about 14 years ago. And not really thinking it was like going to lead to anything. It was just something we did because of what was happening at the time. And because of that, I got to sing at Get Out the Vote things with Jackson Brown, Tom Morello, Peggy Seeger. I got to sing with Masha from Pussy Riot. So, I mean, you want to... I mean, it was...
collide.
Oh, definitely. And I got to do, and one of the most beautiful things, I got to do a play. I played a political pundit with my friend Jan Levine Thal with... Ed Asner, Lou Grant.
Yeah.
And that was one of the weirdest things because I thought if I ever do something with, somebody of that stature, it was going to be in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago. But we were at the little Bartell Community Theater here in Madison, and we're doing a table read in the dressing room I had just been in like 4 weeks before that. And you're just reading through the play and you say a line and you hear Lou Grant's voice coming back to you. Was the weirdest thing ever. He was 90 at the time. He passed away the next year. But that is something I will never forget. That was just absolutely amazing.
Wow.
And just working with, with people like that. And in the tall ship world, there are there are like legendary guys, then Jan Miles in Baltimore, Jamie Trost, Walter Ripke, Tiffany Crewan, who's been my captain when I was doing relief work for her. Who, some of these people are the most incredible sailors in North America, and of course, you would never know that until you work with them. And the people that are coming up, like at the Connecticut Sea Music Festival, so the young performers that are coming up are phenomenal. They're just, they're great. And you have that feeling where it's like, oh, this stuff is in good hands. Everything's going to be cool.
Well, Captain Tom Kastle, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Some really great stories. What an interesting career you've had. But we mentioned your website, but go ahead and give it one more time and let everybody know where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, it's just www.tomkastle.com. So it's TOMKASTLE.com.
Thank you so much, Captain Tom. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Rich. You take care.